The space station called Zenith Prime floated in the darkness between stars. It was huge, bigger than most cities on Earth. Inside its main hall, hundreds of alien species gathered for an important meeting. They came from every corner of the galaxy, each one looking different from the next. Some had scales, others had fur. Some floated in the air while others stood on multiple legs. The one thing they all shared was their view of humans as newcomers who did not belong. Commander Jake Morrison walked into the hall with his team behind him. He was a tall man with gray hair and steady eyes. He had been a soldier for 20 years before becoming a diplomat. His team included scientists, translators, and military advisors. They all wore the dark blue uniforms of Earth's Space Force. Humans had joined the Galactic Council only 5 years ago, and many aliens still thought they were too young and too weak to be there. The hall grew quiet as a massive figure stepped onto the central platform. This was Supreme Commander Zekthor of the Vorath Empire. He stood almost 10 feet tall, his body covered in armor that looked like crystal. The Vorath were known across the galaxy as the greatest warriors. They had never lost a war in over 3,000 years. Their military schools were famous and their soldiers were feared by everyone. Zekthor's voice boomed through the hall. Every alien heard him in their own language through translation devices. Humans, he said, looking directly at Jake. You claim you deserve to be here. You say you have earned your place among us, but you are untested. Your species has only existed in space for a few generations. You know nothing of real war. Jake stepped forward. His heart was beating fast, but his voice stayed calm. We have proven ourselves in every challenge you have given us. We have negotiated peace between fighting species. We have shared our technology. We have followed every rule of the Council. Laughter filled the hall. It came from dozens of different aliens, each one making their own strange sound. Some clicked, some whistled, some made deep rumbling noises. But they were all laughing at the same thing. The idea that humans thought they were equal to the ancient races. Zekthor raised one massive arm and the laughter stopped. Then I make you an offer, he said. Send your best warrior to face the Vorath Grand Trial. If your champion succeeds, humanity will receive full voting rights in the Council. Your territories will be recognized. Your voice will matter. But if your champion fails, you will give up your outer colonies. Those worlds will be redistributed to other species. The hall erupted into noise. Aliens turned to each other, speaking quickly in languages that sounded like music or thunder or wind. Jake felt his stomach drop. The Vorath Grand Trial was legendary. It was a test that combined physical strength, combat skills, survival instincts, and mental power. The trial was designed specifically for Vorath bodies and minds. No outsider had ever completed it. Many had tried. All had failed. Jake turned to his team. They gathered close, speaking in whispers. We can't do this, said one of the military advisors. The trial is impossible. It's designed for aliens who are twice our size and 3 times our strength. We have to decline, another said. We'll lose everything. Jake knew they were right. But he also knew that refusing would make humans look weak. Other species would push harder against them. This was a test they could not avoid, even if they could not win. I'll do it. The voice was quiet but clear. Everyone turned. A young woman stepped out from the back of the group. Her name was Amy Parker, and she was one of the youngest people on the team. She was only 26 years old and barely over 5 feet tall. She had been brought along as a cultural advisor and junior analyst. Nobody had expected her to speak. Amy, no, Jake said immediately. This is not something you can— Sir, I know what I'm doing, Amy interrupted. She looked at him with calm eyes. I've studied the Vorath trials. I've read every report we have about them. I know I'm not the strongest person here. I'm not the most experienced, but I understand what they're really testing. Zekthor's laugh was like thunder. A human female, and such a small one. This is your champion? The other aliens joined in the laughter. The Vorath were massive creatures from a world with heavy gravity. Their reflexes were lightning fast. Their strength could crush metal. The idea of this tiny human facing their trial was absurd. Amy walked through the crowd of her own people. She stepped onto the platform and looked up at Zekthor. She had to tilt her head back just to see his face. When do we start? She asked. Zekthor leaned down, bringing his alien face close to hers. His eyes were like clusters of black diamonds. You have 3 days to prepare, he said. The trial begins at dawn on the 4th day. I almost feel sorry for you, little human. You will fail, and your species will pay the price for your pride." Amy did not look away. "Don't feel sorry for me," she said. "Save that feeling for something else." The hall went silent. No one had expected such boldness from someone so small. Sekthor straightened up and something like respect flickered in his alien eyes for just a moment. Then it was gone. Jake felt like he had been punched in the stomach. They had just bet the future of humanity on a junior officer who barely reached his shoulder. He looked at Amy, trying to understand why she would volunteer for this, why she thought she could succeed where so many others had failed. But as he watched her standing on that platform, surrounded by aliens who towered over her, he saw something. She was not afraid. She was not nervous. She was thinking. Her eyes were moving, watching, calculating. She was already planning. The meeting ended shortly after. The aliens filed out, many of them still laughing. They would spread the news across the galaxy. The humans had accepted the challenge. They had sent a small female as their champion. It would be entertaining to watch her fail. Jake and his team returned to their quarters in silence. Amy walked behind them, her mind already racing through everything she knew about the Vorath. She had 3 days to prepare for something impossible. 3 days to figure out how to win a game that was designed for her to lose. She thought about her grandfather, who had taught her to play chess when she was little. He always said the same thing. "Amy, the smallest piece on the board can defeat the king if you play it right. Never let anyone tell you that being small means being weak." Amy smiled to herself. The Vorath thought they knew what strength meant. They were about to learn something new. The room they gave Amy for preparation was simple and cold. It had white walls, a training area with basic equipment, and a computer screen that could show holographic images. The rest of the human team stood outside the door, arguing in voices that got louder and louder. Jake finally sent them all away except for himself. He walked into the room and found Amy sitting on the floor, staring at the holographic display. It showed images of Vorath anatomy, their fighting styles, and recordings of past trials. She was completely focused, her eyes moving back and forth as she absorbed information. "Amy," Jake said quietly, "you don't have to do this. We can still refuse. We can accept the political consequences and find another way." She looked up at him. "Sir, they won't stop. Today they give us a challenge. Tomorrow they put sanctions on us. Next year they blockade our shipping routes. We need to show them that humanity cannot be pushed around. We need to make them respect us, but why you? Why not one of our trained soldiers? Why not someone who has actually fought in combat?" Amy smiled a little. "Because they expect someone like you, sir. Someone big and strong and impressive. They've prepared their trial for that kind of person." "They haven't prepared for me." Jake sat down beside her. "What do you mean?" "Look at these recordings," Amy said, pointing at the screen. "Every warrior who has tried this trial approached it the same way. They tried to match the Vorath strength for strength. They tried to fight like Vorath fight. They tried to survive like Vorath survive. And they all failed because nobody can beat the Vorath at being Vorath. So what will you do?" "I'll be human," Amy said simply. "I'll do what humans do best. I'll adapt. I'll improvise. I'll find solutions they don't expect." Over the next 3 days, Amy did not spend much time training her body. She knew she could not make herself stronger or faster in just 3 days. Instead, she trained her mind. She studied everything about the Vorath. She learned their history, their culture, their philosophy of war. She analyzed their weaknesses, not physical ones, but mental ones. The Vorath believed in direct confrontation. They believed in overwhelming force. They believed that the strongest warrior always won. Their trial reflected these beliefs. It was designed to test strength against strength, speed against speed, endurance against endurance. But Amy had grown up different. Her grandfather had taught her to play chess, and he taught her that the best victories come from making your opponent play your game, not theirs. You did not win by being stronger. You won by being smarter. News of the challenge spread across every planet in the galaxy. Betting pools opened on hundreds of worlds. The odds against Amy were 10,000 to 1. Observers from countless species arrived at Zenith Prime to watch. They expected to see humanity humiliated. Some came to laugh. Others came to see if humans would learn their lesson about challenging the old powers. On the third evening, Kate Sullivan found Amy standing in the observation deck. Kate was the senior scientist on the delegation, a woman with kind eyes and gray hair. She found Amy staring out at the stars, lost in thought. Can't sleep? Kate asked gently. Just thinking, Amy said. She turned to look at Kate. Did you know that Earth's predators don't always rely on being the strongest? Wolves hunt in packs. They work together. Octopi use camouflage and intelligence. They trick their prey. Humans survived on Earth not because we were the strongest, but because we were the most persistent and creative. Kate smiled sadly. You're not hunting wolves, Amy. You're facing the galaxy's greatest warriors. Maybe that's exactly why I can win, Amy replied. They're warriors. They think like warriors. They expect warriors. I'm something else. I'm a problem solver who happens to wear a uniform. The next morning arrived too quickly. The artificial sun of Zenith Prime rose over the horizon, and Amy stood at the entrance to the trial grounds. The arena was enormous, a massive space that could change its environment through advanced technology. It would test her through multiple challenges over 48 hours straight. No sleep, no real rest. Just challenge after challenge until she either succeeded or failed. Thousands of aliens filled the viewing areas around the arena. Cameras broadcast the event across the galaxy. This would be the most watched event in recent history. Everyone wanted to see if the small human could actually do the impossible. Zekthor stood at the entrance, his massive form blocking out the light. His voice boomed across every speaker. The human has chosen to face our trial. Let all witnesses remember that she entered by her own choice. What happens to her is her own responsibility. Amy checked her equipment one last time. She wore a simple utility suit that could protect against some environmental dangers. She had basic tools but no weapons. The Vorath trial forbade bringing weapons. Participants had to improvise or find them during the challenges. This was part of the test. Any last words, human? Zekthor asked. He gestured to her small size, making sure all the cameras caught the difference between them. He towered over her like a mountain over a pebble. Amy looked directly into the nearest camera. She knew her words would be transmitted to Earth, to every human colony, to her family and friends. Yeah, she said. Watch and learn. She stepped through the entrance and the doors closed behind her with a heavy sound of finality. The first challenge appeared around her immediately. The arena transformed into a hostile environment, a simulation of a Vorath war world. The gravity increased, pressing down on her body like a heavy blanket. The air filled with toxic compounds that made her eyes water even through her suit's filters. Holographic enemies began appearing, alien soldiers that moved with perfect coordination and deadly precision. In the viewing chamber, the aliens leaned forward to watch. This was the part where most participants panicked. The sudden change, the hostile environment, the multiple threats all at once. It overwhelmed them, but Amy did not panic. She immediately dropped low, using the terrain for cover. She did not try to fight the holographic enemies. Instead, she watched them. She studied their patterns. She noticed how they spawned, where they moved, how they coordinated their attacks. Within 10 minutes, she had figured out the algorithm controlling them. Within 20 minutes, she was using the environment itself as a weapon. She collapsed structures to block their paths. She triggered chain reactions that eliminated multiple enemies at once. She never engaged in direct combat when she could avoid it. In the viewing chamber, an old Vorath military instructor named Tekvar watched with growing interest. She's not fighting, he said to another observer. She's reorganizing the battlefield. Jake watched the monitors, his hands clenched tight. Amy was moving through the challenge faster than any recorded attempt. But she was not doing it through combat or strength. She was doing it through thinking. By the 12-hour mark, Amy had completed 3 challenges. These same challenges typically took Vorath warriors 18 hours. She was exhausted, her body shaking from the effort. The high gravity was crushing her. The toxic air was making it hard to breathe even with filters. But she kept moving forward. And across the galaxy, in homes and gathering places, on ships and stations, humans watched their screens in silence. The laughter had stopped. Now everyone was paying attention. Amy stumbled during the 4th challenge, falling to her knees. For a moment, it looked like she might give up. The cameras zoomed in on her face. She was crying from exhaustion and pain, but her eyes were still alert, still thinking. She stood up again. Slowly, painfully, but she stood up, and she kept going. In the human delegation viewing area, Kate wiped tears from her eyes. She's going to do it, she whispered. I don't know how, but she's actually going to do it. Jake did not respond. He could not speak. He just watched as Amy, Tiny Amy, who should not have had a chance, continued to defy every expectation and rewrite what it meant to be strong. 20 hours into the trial, Amy faced the challenge that everyone had been waiting for. The arena transformed again, but this time there was no clever way around it. 3 holographic Vorath warriors materialized in front of her, each one standing 9 feet tall in perfect combat armor. The rules were simple and brutal. Defeat them or fail the trial completely. In the viewing chamber, the alien representatives stopped their conversations and focused entirely on the screens. This was where the human would break. Physical combat was the foundation of Vorath culture. These holographic warriors were programmed to fight exactly like their greatest champions. They were fast, strong, and skilled in combat techniques refined over thousands of years. Amy stood in the center of the arena, breathing hard. 20 hours of continuous challenges in high gravity had pushed her body to its limits. Her muscles trembled with exhaustion. Sweat soaked through her suit. She had cuts and bruises covering her arms and legs, but her eyes were still sharp, still watching, still calculating. The first Vorath warrior moved with shocking speed. It covered the distance between them in seconds, its massive fist swinging toward her head with enough force to break concrete. Amy did not try to block it. She did not try to counter it with strength. She simply was not there when the fist arrived. She dropped and rolled using the warrior's own momentum against it. The holographic Vorath stumbled past her, and before it could recover, Amy was already moving toward the second warrior. She grabbed a piece of broken debris from an earlier challenge and threw it not as a weapon, but as a distraction. The debris hit the second warrior's visual sensors at the exact moment Amy changed direction. "She's not fighting," Kate whispered in the human viewing area. "She's buying time." "For what?" someone asked. Jake understood. "To think, to plan, to find the pattern." Amy led the 3 warriors on a chase through the arena's obstacles. She never engaged them directly when she could avoid it. She was studying them, learning how they moved, how they responded, how they coordinated. Vorath combat was beautiful and elegant, full of ancient techniques passed down through generations. But it was also predictable. They fought with honor, with established forms, with rules that every Vorath learned from childhood. Amy fought with none of that. She fought like a human cornered by predators. She fought dirty, creative, and without any concern for what was honorable or fair. She used every advantage the environment gave her. She baited one warrior into striking a support column, bringing debris crashing down on its head. She used the terrain to separate the 3 warriors, preventing them from attacking together. She targeted joints and weak points, exploiting every limitation of their holographic bodies. When the third warrior finally cornered her, forcing her into direct hand-to-hand combat, she did not try to match its strength. She went for its legs, destabilizing it. She used leverage and momentum instead of power. She made it work harder, made it waste energy, made it frustrated. The fight took 43 minutes. When it ended, Amy stood among 3 deactivated holographic bodies bleeding from a dozen new cuts, her right arm possibly fractured. But she stood. She had won. The viewing chamber was completely silent. No one made a sound. They had just watched a human, the smallest participant in the trial's history, defeat 3 Vorath combat simulations through pure tactical thinking and stubborn refusal to quit. Tekvar, the old Vorath instructor, spoke quietly to Zekthor. "Commander, she does not fight with honor." "No," Zekthor replied, his tone impossible to read. "She fights to win. Perhaps we have forgotten the difference." The trial continued without mercy. Amy had no time to rest, no time to recover. The next challenge began immediately. This time it was a strategic simulation. She had to command virtual military forces against a Vorath fleet in a space battle. Most participants tried to match the Vorath fleet move for move, using similar tactics. Amy did something different. She refused to engage in direct combat. Instead, she identified the supply routes that the enemy fleet depended on. She mined those routes. She forced the fleet to take longer paths. She made them burn through their resources faster than they could resupply. It was attrition warfare, something the Vorath rarely faced. They were so used to overwhelming force and quick victories that they had not optimized their strategy for long, grinding conflicts. Amy won the simulation not through brilliant tactics, but through patience and resource management. The observers watched in growing disbelief. She was not winning the way anyone expected. She was not winning the way the trial was designed for participants to win. She was creating her own solutions, her own strategies, her own path through challenges that should have been impossible. By the 30th hour, Amy entered a survival challenge. The arena transformed into a frozen wilderness with predatory creatures and extreme weather. Most participants tried to dominate the environment, to hunt and fight and prove their strength against nature. Amy immediately found shelter. She rationed her energy. She avoided unnecessary confrontation with the predators. She used her tools to create simple traps and defenses. She survived not by conquering the wilderness, but by respecting it and adapting to it. The cameras followed her every move. Across the galaxy, billions of beings watched. The betting pools had stopped. Nobody was laughing anymore. The question was no longer if she would fail. The question was how far she could possibly go. At the 35-hour mark, Amy faced a challenge that broke her physically. It was a climbing trial, a vertical cliff face that had to be scaled in high gravity with minimal equipment. This was a test of pure physical endurance and strength. She made it halfway up before her hands gave out. Her fingers, cut and bleeding, could not maintain their grip. She fell, caught by the safety systems, and landed hard on the ground below. For a long moment, she just lay there. The cameras zoomed in. Her chest heaved with exhausted breaths. Her eyes were closed. It looked like she had finally reached her limit. Jake stood up in the viewing chamber, his fists clenched.
"Get up," he whispered.
"Amy, please get up." Her lips were moving. The audio sensors picked up fragments of words. She was talking to herself, whispering something that only she could hear. Maybe her grandfather's words. Maybe a prayer. Maybe just counting to calm her mind. Then she opened her eyes. She rolled onto her side, then to her hands and knees. Slowly, painfully, she stood up. Her legs shook. Her whole body trembled. But she walked back to the base of the cliff and started climbing again. This time she climbed differently. When her hands failed, she used her elbows. When her feet slipped, she found new holds with her knees. She moved slowly, so slowly that it hurt to watch. It took her 3 hours to complete a climb that Vorath warriors completed in 30 minutes, but she completed it. She reached the top, pulled herself over the edge, and lay there gasping like a fish out of water. The safety systems confirmed her success. The next challenge would begin in 10 minutes. In those 10 minutes, Amy forced herself to eat emergency rations and drink water. She did basic first aid on her worst injuries. She closed her eyes and practiced breathing exercises to calm her racing heart. When the 10 minutes ended, she stood up and faced the next challenge. By the 40th hour, something unprecedented was happening across the galaxy. People who had never cared about humans were now watching every moment of Amy's trial. They watched this small creature refuse to quit despite impossible odds. They watched her solve problems in ways that defied traditional thinking. They watched her turn every weakness into an unexpected advantage. In the viewing chamber, even some of the alien representatives who had laughed at the beginning were now silent and respectful. Tekfor turned to Zekthor and said, "Commander, regardless of whether she completes the trial, she has already proven something important." "What is that?" Zekthor asked. "That we have been measuring strength incorrectly," Tekfor replied. "We measure it in muscle and speed and combat prowess. Humans measure it in something else, something we had forgotten existed." The next challenge was psychological warfare, designed to break the participant's mind through fear and doubt. Amy entered it with 40 hours of exhaustion weighing on her. She faced visions of Earth burning, her people dying, her friends suffering. The simulation attacked every fear, every doubt, every moment of weakness in her mind. But Amy had learned something important over the past 40 hours. Fear was just information. Pain was just a signal. Exhaustion was just a state. They were all things that could be acknowledged, processed, and worked through. She sat down in the middle of the psychological attack, closed her eyes, and simply refused to let it control her. After 2 hours of trying to break her, the simulation gave up. One challenge remained. The final test. The trial that had stopped every outsider in history. The arena walls dissolved like smoke, revealing something completely unexpected. Amy found herself standing in a perfect replica of the Vorath Grand Council chamber. It was a massive room with high ceilings and ancient symbols carved into every surface. 7 holographic figures materialized around her, each one representing a different aspect of Vorath philosophy and military tradition. In the viewing chamber, Jake felt his blood turn cold. "No," he whispered. "Not this." Anything but this. Kate looked at him with worried eyes. What is this challenge? The trial of wisdom, Jake said. It's not about fighting or survival. It's about philosophy, ethics, military theory. They debate you. They test your understanding of what it means to be a warrior and a leader. Amy is exhausted beyond anything human bodies were designed to endure. How can she possibly debate ancient military philosophy with the accumulated wisdom of a 10,000-year-old warrior culture? On the screens, Amy swayed on her feet. 42 hours into the trial, she was running on willpower alone. Her eyes were bloodshot. Her face was pale except for the bruises. Her hands shook constantly. But she was still standing, still present, still aware. The first elder spoke. His holographic form was massive and ancient, decorated with symbols of countless victories. You command a fleet. Your enemy has taken civilians hostage aboard a space station. To save the civilians, you must risk your entire force and abandon your strategic objective. What do you do? Amy's voice was hoarse but clear. I need more information. What is the strategic objective? What resources do I have available? Why did the enemy take hostages? The objective is victory, the elder replied. Your resources are limited. The enemy wants to escape with their lives. Amy took a slow breath. Then the scenario is incomplete. You ask me to choose between civilians and victory, but you don't define what victory means. If I sacrifice civilians to achieve a military objective, what am I defending? An empire of empty space? Victory without people is just death with better organization. A murmur went through the viewing chamber. Several alien representatives leaned forward. The human was not giving the expected answers. She was challenging the questions themselves. The second elder spoke, his tone sharp. You speak of compassion. Compassion is weakness on the battlefield. Warriors must be hard, must be willing to make difficult choices. Do you deny this? I deny that compassion and strength are opposites, Amy replied. She had to focus hard to keep her thoughts clear through the exhaustion. The Vorath have ruled through strength for thousands of years. But how many species joined you willingly? How many followed you because they wanted to, not because they feared you? The third elder interrupted.
Fear is a tool.
The strong use it to maintain order. Fear is unstable, Amy countered. Humans learned this the hard way. We spent thousands of years conquering each other, building empires on fear. Every single one of them eventually collapsed. The civilizations that lasted were the ones that people chose to be part of. Strength without trust is just tyranny waiting to fall apart. The debate continued. Each elder presented scenarios of warfare, ethics, and leadership. They probed her understanding of military theory, tested her moral reasoning, challenged her assumptions about power and authority. Amy did not try to answer like a Vorath. She could not pretend to understand their culture better than they did. Instead, she answered as a human. She drew on Earth's long, bloody history. She talked about the world wars that nearly destroyed humanity. She discussed how people learned that winning a war did not matter if you created conditions for the next one. The fourth elder presented a new scenario. You face an enemy who refuses to surrender despite certain defeat. Your soldiers are tired and want to go home. Do you show mercy and risk appearing weak, or do you finish the enemy completely? I ask why they won't surrender, Amy said. People don't fight hopeless battles without reason. Maybe they're fighting for their families. Maybe they're fighting because they believe surrender means death anyway. Maybe they're fighting for honor. If I understand their motivation, I can end the conflict without more bloodshed. You would negotiate with those you are meant to destroy? The elder asked incredulously. I would rather turn an enemy into an ally than rule over a graveyard, Amy replied. Every enemy you kill is someone's child, parent, friend. Every enemy you make an ally is someone who might fight beside you in the future, instead of against you. The fifth elder spoke. War is not a philosophical exercise. In the moment of battle, there is no time for such considerations. Warriors must act on instinct and training. Amy nodded slowly. You're right. In battle, you act on instinct, but instinct is just training that has become automatic. If you train warriors to see everyone as potential allies instead of just enemies, their instincts change. Humans learn this too. Our best soldiers are not the ones who kill most easily. They're the ones who protect most fiercely. The sixth elder posed a direct challenge. You are small and weak by any physical standard. You have barely survived this trial. How can you speak of strength and leadership when you possess so little of either? For the first time in the debate, Amy smiled. It was a tired, pained smile, but genuine. You're watching me complete a trial designed for warriors 3 times my size. You're watching me do it not through strength but through adaptation and stubbornness. That's exactly my point. Strength comes in different forms. Leadership is not about being the biggest or strongest. It's about bringing out the best in those you lead. The 7th elder appeared. This hologram was the largest and most ornate, covered in symbols of ancient authority. This was the grand philosopher, the ultimate arbiter of the trial of wisdom. When he spoke, even the other elders fell silent. Human, the grand philosopher said, his voice resonating through the chamber. You have challenged our assumptions throughout this debate. You have presented alternatives to our philosophy. You have done so while exhausted, injured, and facing the accumulated wisdom of our civilization. Why should we accept your views over traditions that have served us for millennia? Amy took a moment to gather her thoughts. This was the final question, the one that would determine success or failure. She could feel her body starting to shut down. Her vision was getting blurry. Her thoughts were harder to organize, but she had to answer well. You shouldn't accept my views just because I say them, Amy began. You should consider them because they come from experience. Humans made every mistake you can imagine. We conquered, we enslaved, we destroyed. We built empires on blood and watched them fall apart. We developed weapons that could end all life on our planet, and we came within minutes of using them. She paused, fighting against the exhaustion that threatened to overwhelm her. But we survived. We looked at the ashes of what we had done and decided there had to be a better way. We learned that strength without wisdom leads to destruction, that victory without justice leads to more war, that power without compassion eventually turns on itself. These are pretty words, the grand philosopher said, but the galaxy is harsh. Idealism does not survive first contact with reality. Then explain why you called us here, Amy challenged. If power is all that matters, why hold trials? Why debate philosophy? Why not just take what you want? You could crush humanity right now if you chose to, but you don't. Because even the Vorath know that power without legitimacy eventually crumbles. You're testing me not to see if I'm strong. You're testing to see if humans deserve a place at the table. The silence that followed was absolute. Every being watching across the galaxy held their breath. The grand philosopher studied Amy for a long moment. She swayed on her feet, barely able to stand, but she did not look away. You are exhausted, the grand philosopher finally said. You are injured. You are small by any warrior's measure, yet you have completed trials that broke much larger and stronger beings. How is this possible? Amy's answer was simple and honest. Because I'm human. We're not the strongest species. We're not the fastest or smartest individually, but we're stubborn, we adapt. We find solutions where others see only walls. You designed these trials for warriors. I'm not a warrior. I'm a problem solver who refused to quit. That's what makes humans dangerous. We turn every disadvantage into a tool. The grand philosopher turned to confer with the other elders. They spoke in the Vorath language, their voices creating harmonics that resonated through the chamber. The conversation lasted several minutes. Amy used that time to lock her knees and focus on breathing, fighting against the exhaustion that wanted to pull her down. Finally, the grand philosopher turned back to her. His voice was formal and clear. Never in our history has an outsider completed the trial of wisdom. The test is not to provide correct answers, for there are no correct answers. The test is to demonstrate thinking worthy of leadership, to challenge assumptions, to defend your beliefs with clarity and conviction even under extreme pressure. He paused, and Amy felt her heart pounding so hard she thought everyone could hear it. You have done this. You have presented alternative philosophies. You have challenged our traditions with respect but without fear. You have demonstrated wisdom that goes beyond knowledge. The human has passed the final trial. The words echoed through the chamber and across every communication channel in the galaxy. The human had succeeded. Lieutenant Amy Parker, barely 5 feet tall and 26 years old, had completed the Vorath Grand Trial that had broken champions from hundreds of species over thousands of years. In the human delegation viewing area, chaos erupted. People jumped up, shouting and crying and hugging each other. Jake felt tears streaming down his face before he even realized he was crying. Kate was laughing and sobbing at the same time, her hands covering her mouth in disbelief. They had witnessed the impossible. But in the arena, Amy did not celebrate. She had nothing left. Her body had been running on pure willpower for hours, and now that willpower had accomplished its goal. She took one step forward, then her legs simply stopped working. She collapsed onto the floor of the arena, unconscious before she hit the ground. Medical teams rushed in immediately. Human doctors ran alongside Vorath medical specialists, all of them working together to stabilize her. Her vital signs were critical. She was severely dehydrated. Her body was shutting down from exhaustion. Multiple injuries covered her body, and her right arm was definitely broken, but she was alive and she would recover. Zekthor himself descended to the arena floor, his massive form casting a shadow over the medical team. He watched as they carefully placed Amy onto a medical transport, checking her vital signs and administering emergency treatment. This tiny human had just done something he had thought impossible. Tekvar, he called to his old instructor who had followed him down. Your assessment. The elderly Vorath approached, his compound eyes fixed on the unconscious human. She fought without honor. She used tactics that violated every principle of warrior combat. She challenged our most fundamental beliefs about strength and leadership. And? Zekthor prompted. Tekvar was quiet for a moment. And she reminded me why we created these trials. Not to prove we are the strongest. Not to humiliate others. But to find those truly worthy of standing beside us as equals. The humans are young, Commander. Young in space, young in their time among the stars. But they are old in a different way. Old in lessons learned through terrible mistakes. Old in wisdom born from nearly destroying themselves. 3 days passed before Amy woke up in the medical facility. She opened her eyes slowly, confused by the white ceiling and the beeping of medical monitors. Her whole body ached like she had been hit by a truck. Every muscle screamed. Her right arm was in a regeneration cast. Tubes connected her to various machines. Jake was sitting in a chair beside her bed. He looked exhausted but happy. When he saw her eyes open, his face lit up with the biggest smile she had ever seen. Did I? Amy started to ask, her voice barely a whisper. You did, Jake said, and his voice cracked with emotion. Amy, you actually did it. You completed the trial. You won. The implications were still spreading across the galaxy like ripples on a pond. The Galactic Council had held an emergency session to formalize humanity's new status. Full voting rights had been granted. Territorial claims were recognized. But more importantly, something fundamental had changed in how other species viewed humans. They were no longer dismissed as lucky newcomers or aggressive expansionists. They were problem solvers. They were survivors who had learned wisdom through hardship. They were beings who could look at an impossible situation and find a way through it anyway. Kate visited later that day, bringing reports and messages. You've become famous, she said with a grin, showing Amy her data tablet. Messages are coming in from 17 different species offering alliances and trade agreements. The Vorath Military Academy wants you to give lectures on unconventional warfare. There's even a betting pool on whether you'll accept any of the offers. Amy laughed weakly, then winced because laughing hurt. I'm not a warrior. I just did what I had to do. That's what makes them nervous, Kate replied. The Vorath are warriors by choice, by culture, by tradition. You became a warrior by necessity, and there's nothing more dangerous than someone who fights not because they want to, but because they must. A week later, Amy could walk again with assistance. Her injuries were healing quickly thanks to advanced medical technology. The day came for the formal recognition ceremony in front of the full Galactic Council. Amy stood before representatives from hundreds of species, feeling small but no longer insignificant. Zekthor presented the Charter of Recognition himself. His voice carried across the amphitheater. The human species has demonstrated qualities worthy of full membership in this council. Through trials of combat, strategy, and wisdom, they have earned their place among the elder races. But then he did something that shocked everyone watching. The Supreme Commander of the Vorath Empire, one of the most powerful beings in the galaxy, knelt down. He lowered himself until his eyes were level with Amy's, a gesture of respect that Vorath rarely showed to anyone. Lieutenant Amy Parker, he said, speaking directly to her, you have taught my people something we had forgotten in our millennia of dominance. Strength comes in many forms. Wisdom is not limited by size or age, and the most dangerous opponent is not the one who fights like you, but the one who refuses to fight on your terms at all. He stood and addressed the entire assembly. Let it be known throughout the galaxy that humanity is not to be underestimated. They are small, but they endure. They are young, but they are wise. They choose peace when possible, but they are formidable when necessary. The Vorath Empire acknowledges them as equals and offers them alliance. The chamber erupted in sounds of approval from hundreds of different species. Amy stood there, still barely 5 feet tall, still young, still somewhat confused by everything that had happened. She thought about her grandfather who had taught her chess. He had always said that the smallest piece on the board could defeat a king if played correctly. Jake stood beside her, along with Kate and the rest of the delegation. "What are you thinking?" he asked quietly. Amy looked around at the assembled representatives of galactic civilization. "I'm thinking about everyone back on Earth who's watching this. Every kid who ever felt too small or too weak or too different. I hope they see that it's not about being the strongest. What is it about then? It's about refusing to give up. It's about turning your disadvantages into advantages. It's about being so stubborn that the universe eventually stops trying to stop you." She smiled, and maybe that's the most human thing there is. In the months that followed, the galaxy changed. Other younger species, inspired by Amy's success, began challenging the old hierarchies. The Vorath trials were reformed to be more inclusive, recognizing that wisdom and strength came in many forms. New alliances formed based not just on power, but on mutual respect and shared goals. Amy returned to Earth briefly, where she was celebrated as a hero. Parades were held in major cities. Children dressed up as her for Halloween. Schools taught about her trial in history classes, but Amy quietly refused most of the attention. She declined promotions and medals. She went back to her work as a cultural liaison, helping to build bridges between humanity and the hundreds of species now eager to work with humans. But on Zenith Prime, in the Hall of Champions where every trial victor's name was recorded, a new inscription appeared. It was written in the ancient Vorath script, translated into hundreds of languages so all species could read it. Amy Parker, human. She who taught warriors that strength without wisdom is merely force, and wisdom without courage is merely knowledge. She who proved that the smallest voice can speak the loudest truth when it refuses to be silent. And below it, in smaller letters, an addition that Zekthor himself had written. She who made us laugh, then made us listen, then made us rethink everything we thought we knew about strength. Across human space, in military academies and civilian schools, in homes and public spaces, Amy's trial became legendary. Not because she was the strongest or smartest or most impressive, but because she represented something fundamentally human. The ability to face impossible odds and find a way anyway. The refusal to accept defeat just because someone bigger said you should. The aliens had laughed when Zekthor issued his challenge. They had laughed harder when a small human woman accepted it. They had expected to see humanity humiliated, to learn their place in the galactic order, but they learned something else instead. They learned that humans measured strength differently. They learned that size did not determine capability. They learned that the most dangerous beings in the galaxy were not the ones who looked most powerful, but the ones who refused to accept limitations. In the vast, ancient galaxy full of elder races and established powers, there were now humans, small compared to many species, young compared to ancient civilizations, but unmistakably, undeniably present, no longer asking for permission to exist, but standing as equals who had earned their place. And it all began with one small woman who raised her hand when everyone expected silence, who accepted a challenge everyone said was impossible, who climbed when she could barely stand, thought when she could barely breathe, and refused to quit when every reasonable person would have given up. Amy Parker changed the galaxy not by being stronger than everyone else, but by being exactly what she was. A human. Stubborn, creative, and absolutely unwilling to accept that impossible meant